But then, yeah, then, when our D brick.
Just make an ILM.
Yes,
You have to bring them. You have to let them answer your. Even then.
to the BPA. With the. Yes. Yeah. I'm sure that I was, more.
Yeah. They wanted to be different.
Yeah.
Clickers today.
Always they were just for them. But the touch.
I can participate, yeah. Here.
No, yeah, exactly.
All right. Are we all set then? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. This is our first breakout session of the day. I've already talked to you all way too much. So I'm going to keep the introduction very short for this breakout, but this is Christopher Proctor and Alex Stepp from Indiana University Southeast, which remind me, what city is IU Southeast in?
New Albany. We're right across from Louisville.
Nice. Okay. So welcome to both of them. We're going to talk to us about reconceptualizing interlibrary loan to create a co-curricular model of student learning. So I'll just turn it right over and hear what you've got.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, welcome everybody. It's always nice when you kind of presentation and people actually come. So we will be doing a version of this also at the ILM annual conference coming up, but it will be much more intensive with a second presentation that goes into how you can build a co-curricular model yourself. I am Christopher Proctor. I am a tenured associate librarian at Indiana University Southeast, where I serve as the coordinator of access services and also public services in that sense. And I'm also the campus accreditation project manager. And you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Alex Stepp. I work underneath Christopher. He is my boss as an interlibrary loan specialist at IU Southeast, and also as a morning supervisor for our work studies.
Yeah, so thank you, Alex. What we're going to be talking about today is this concept of communities. A lot of times in libraries, we think of the community in which we serve, or if we're academic librarians, we think of our campus community. But if we break that down, we can really see that we serve communities, right? They're concentric circles of communities that continuously adapt what their needs are. And sometimes I think we are overly focused on our patron community, and that's great. They're essential, right? But we have other communities that we can also talk about serving. And one of the ways that we can do that is to begin adapting what are traditional services for our patron communities, turning them inwards to make sure that we're serving also our, in our case, work study or student employee, what we call adjunct staff communities as well. So in the course, it worked. So what we're going to be talking about today is how we created a co-curricular assessment plan so that we can look at being a partner in the teaching and learning pedagogical mission of the university as it extends outside of the traditional classroom space. Basically, this space is not the only space that learning happens on a college campus, and it shouldn't be the only place. So how do we create a co-curricular learning environment that spans the entire campus? And the library, we argue, is ripe for that, especially when you look at our regional accreditors, such as the Higher Learning Commission. They're the ones who accredit Indiana universities, colleges, and universities. And so within that, how do we create this idea of having program learning goals? How do we, from that, identify what our student learning outcomes could be? Then how do we foster an environment of continuous improvement? Sometimes we create something, it becomes our baby, and we're like, oh, it's perfect. No, it's not. It can always be improved. So how do we create an intentional assessment plan that allows us to collect data, to make data-informed decisions, maybe not data-driven decisions, but data-informed decisions so that we can continuously improve student learning in a co-curricular context. Also, within this, moving from this idea of training our employees to mentoring our employees beyond what they do in the library and beyond their time even at the university. And then how, for this particular conference, how the next phase, we are moving into phase 4 of this multi-year project to begin embracing interlibrary loan and document delivery and reconceptualizing it within assessment of student learning within program level goals that support co-curricular learning within a non-traditional classroom environment. So the first part of this will be me pretty much rambling about sort of the context, what led us up to this, how it's going. And then I'm going to turn it over to Alex to give you the practical application of what this looks like and ways that you might be able to deploy this at your own institutions. But you can also, this is a lot. So this is multi-year phases. You can also reach out to either one of us, and you can use us as consultants, and we will work with you to help map these program learning goals to your own library environments if you want. All right. So the overall background, Access Services, basically, we are a regional campus of Indiana University. We currently serve under 3,000 students. At our height, we are at 5,000 students. We are not an R1. We are not even an R2. We are a teaching-focused institution. Within that, Access, my department, we're the only ones who employ work-study students within the library. We're employing about 15 to 16. And frankly, without them, operations wouldn't happen. We wouldn't be able to keep the doors open for as long as we do. They're an essential part of our services. And so one of the things, when I took over this role in 2018, I was struck by a student who had been there longer. I started at the university in 2016, but I didn't become a faculty member until 2018. A student who was a senior, work-study student, worked in the library for like 4 years. She was going to grad school. She asked me to write her a letter of recommendation. So I wrote a letter of recommendation based on her performance, but integrated it into here's how what she's done in the library directly will benefit her in grad school. I gave the letter to her and she was like, I don't do this. I don't know any of this. I didn't know I was doing this. And I was like, that's a problem. Okay. So how at that point do we translate what they're doing in the library beyond library work? We don't have an LIS program. These students are not coming to us because they want to be librarians. So how do we make them career ready beyond the library that fits within their own goals, their own majors, their own future careers? How can they say that by knowing Library of Congress classification system will allow me to be a great alphanumeric organizer within an office setting? They didn't have that knowledge and skill. They had the skills, they didn't have the knowledge to translate it. So within that context, information literacy is a general education learning outcome for our campus. And the library is embedded within the gen ed learning outcome of our campus. To earn your gen ed credit, first year seminars and pathway classes and certain research classes actually have to be taught by a librarian, come into the library to our classroom and be taught. And then we're the ones who also assess that assignment to determine whether or not the gen ed learning outcome is met. So we are the content experts, if you will, for information literacy on our campus. And so one of the things that I noticed is how library students, or the students who worked in the library prior to my time, they were not being taught advanced information literacy skills. No idea why. It's because we had a traditional model of big scary librarian at that desk over there. You can only answer where's the bathroom and check books in and out. That's complete, in my opinion. If you do that, that's great. In my opinion, it's completely inappropriate. One, we're not empowering our students. We're not trusting them to be information literate individuals. And we are denying them the opportunity to enhance their own general education learning outcome, which then enhances their research experience in their own classes. So I wanted to integrate that. And fundamentally, the earliest phase of this was moving from this question of what can students do for the library to what can we as the library be doing for our students. So it is a mind shift. All right, so we're going to start with this idea of career readiness. So to create this program, I first had to develop program learning goals. What is it they should know when they leave? Well, I didn't have to do too much with that because the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE, has career readiness competencies. And for them, career readiness basically can be broken down into these three categories: workforce competence, workforce readiness, and workforce beyond specific fields of study. They have a great website if you want to look at it. But what they are doing is they're also out there surveying employers and being like, what are, people coming directly out of college, what skills are they lacking? What do they not have? What are their majors, right? What skills are you looking for that's not even addressed maybe at the college level? So from there, and again, I want to highlight that for career readiness, they do recommend that it goes both curricular and what they call extracurricular. We would call it co-curricular, but also extracurricular. How can all of those be harnessed to create career-ready graduates? So they broke it down into these 8 categories: career and self-development, communication, critical thinking, equity and inclusion, leadership, professionalism, teamwork, and technology. However, they're not just giving you those terms. What they're also doing is they're giving you a definition of what that means, and then they are breaking that down. So the first thing I did when I created the program learning goals, correctly citing them, of course, but I took these 8 as my primary learning goals. And then each one is defined using the definition by NACE. However, I added an additional one: information literacy, as defined by the general education learning curriculum on our campus. Because if you notice, none of that is here, but it could fit into multiple categories. Yes. There we go. So that's great, but when the Higher Learning Commission came to our campus in 2021, because they noticed that we needed to improve our curricular and co-curricular assessment activities on our campus, which we did, I remember they had all the co-curriculars in one classroom, and then they asked us, what are you using to define the skill, to inform the skills and knowledge that your students are gaining through the co-curricular program? Well, we already had one. We had information literacy as part of the Gen Ed. I also then had NACE career readiness competencies. That's great, but that wasn't tied directly back to our campus at that point. So at the same time, our campus developed undergraduate institutional learning outcomes and graduate institutional learning outcomes. So basically, no matter your path of study, these are something you should leave with. So what I did then was focus on the undergraduate institutional learning outcomes, because we don't normally get a lot of graduate students with work study working for us, and they're pretty much the same thing. So what I did was to conceptualize these, but within the NACE framework, to better reinvigorate our training mentoring program. And so to do that, I had to map the Federal Work Study Program Learning Goals, which are the NACE career readiness competencies in this category, took the newly created institutional learning outcomes and mapped them, and then based on the training program, which is built, it's multifaceted, but it's built in our learning management software, Canvas. And so what I then did was map the learning activities to all of these. Now, this entire document should have been embedded here, and it worked on my computer, but it did not work right here. So I can't show you the other 2 pages of this. But one of the great things about this, and I wish I could at least show you the second page, when I got to teamwork from the NACE career readiness competencies, there was only like 2 or 3 modules that providing some sort of learning activity for them to develop that skill. The great thing about doing a mapping through assessment process is you can then see those areas that students aren't getting experience and knowledge in. And that and teamwork, leadership and teamwork, both led to us identifying at this point interlibrary loan and document delivery to be able to be built into this system to give them those skills as well as advanced information literacy knowledge and skills. Trying to remember what my next slide is. Okay. Yeah, so then from there, like I said, we have to have measurable markers to determine whether or not student learning is happening. So what we then did is we have a culture of continuous improvement in our library through a robust assessment plan that looks at both operational and co-curricular aspects of the library. And so in this case, this is just the work study co-curricular assessment aspect. So from here, our assessment plan has this first goal. Can I move this? No, I cannot move this. That's okay. Instruction and student learning. The library will be an active partner in the teaching, learning, and research mission of the campus, focusing on information literacy. Then I created the outcome. So this is 1C. The IU Southeast Library will foster career readiness as mapped to the IU Southeast institutional learning ILOs and advanced information literacy knowledge and skills as defined by general education. And learning outcomes in what we call peer research assistants. We don't call them work study students anymore. They're peer researchers. And we also gave them 3 different titles depending on rank, and we modeled those after academic titles: peer research assistants, peer research associates, and peer research, basically full rank. They're peer research mentors. And we expect different things of them as they move up. So from here, we had the measurement tools that we are using to determine whether or not student learning is happening. We have information literacy pre and post test administered in Canvas. Yes, I'm a monster. I test them multiple times. I also make them write essays. They have to write essays linking what they're learning back to their careers or disciplines of study, so that my nursing students can look at that and say, I will use this aspect of communication that I'm learning in the library. Then I can take that back to administration and be like, I need more money to have more students, okay? So another one is the now career readiness pre and post test administrative pre and post administered in Canvas. This is your stuff like what's the difference between policies and procedures? What is a professional code of ethics? Service models. We do not use customer service in my library. At least we will never, as long as I'm there. I believe it's neoliberal encroachment on the academy. So we use patron services. But they learn about the difference between patron services, customer service. They learn about the difference between customer service and client services in the medical field. Like, they get an overview of that because they're going into many different fields. We've also taken Library of Congress and Dewey, because we are a satellite branch also of our local public library. They have a collection in our library, and we provide services for the local community through that. We even participate in summer reading. And so they have to learn 2 different alphanumeric organization skills, which is, I'd say, an intermediate to advanced information literacy component. Then within that, you have your defined success criteria. So basically, the average post-assessment score for peer research assistants will be at least 85%. Then 90% as we move up to associates, then 95% as they move up to peer mentors. And this is every year. I take these data and I literally mark it green or red. Did we do this? Did we not? Based on those data, we then go back to the Canvas modules. We go back to the program itself. We go back to individual trainers and we say, what's lacking if we're missing? Why did they not learn this in the way that they should? And then we tweak the program. And so we just completely re-overhauled it this year, because what we found on our assessment data is they could do the hands-on things. Find me a peer-reviewed article. They could do the thing. Explain to me the importance of using peer-reviewed literature versus popular literature. Crickets. They couldn't do that. Yeah, because they were just, taught that. So, and another thing, just describe to me in depth the strengths and weaknesses of the peer review process. It's not perfect. They couldn't do that. Anybody working in the library, I believe, should lead with these types of knowledge and skills. So it's broken up into those main areas. And we will show you how the modules look and work in a moment. But overall, this is what it looks like. We went from what used to be 7 modules that talked everything, had hands-on stuff in it, some conceptual stuff. It was a little mixed. With one big pre-assessment test, they took like 50 question test at the very beginning. And then I did smaller post assessments after that. I couldn't map it as well as I wanted. It was more of I had to wait till the end of the semester. Okay, and then decide what we were going to change. We now have 24, including the 2 children, 24 modules they have to complete. And the goal is no longer to get them done in the first few weeks. It will take the entire semester. And it will go into semester 2 and beyond. And how each module works, each module is focused on a particular topic. It may say service experience foundational. Another one may be service intermediate, right? Dealing with difficult patrons. Information literacy foundational, information literacy intermediate, information literacy advanced, right? So they're all in topics like that. In the previous set, most of the modules focused on reading or video, depending on what I was doing for that particular module. Those of us who teach in the classroom, we know that one learning method is not good. You need to have multi-learning modes. And so most modules now have a reading component, some sort of video component, and sometimes an active, you're going out onto the web and having to do something, come back and answer a question so I know that you did the thing. And even if there's a major video component, there's now like a summary component of that written down so that they can get to that. So there's the pre-assessment that they take before they can even see the introduction to the module. Then we have what's called the major intervention, which is the module itself. Then immediately after, they take a post-assessment. And in that moment, we can see how much, if they learned it all, and what their struggle areas are. And so they have a debrief session that we call a micro-intervention, which is an in-depth conversation or experiential learning. It just depends on the nature of that module and their mentor. So that's the first micro-intervention that they have. If on their first post-assessment, they do not get 100%, they have to take a post-assessment, a second post-assessment, so that we can then see if the micro-intervention did anything. Are we seeing continuous growth in learning? Is that intervention working? And then I can now track it in real time. We know that if 95% of our students are missing the same question, we have to go back and say, is it not addressed that well in the module? And we're looking. No, it is. So what's the problem? We have learned this semester that students have a problem with not questions, inverse. So not which of these is the correct answer, but which of these is not the correct answer. They struggle. We may tone those down in the future, but we'll keep some in. Why? Because it will help them in their traditional classroom experience when they're taking tests. That's the way the assessment module should be getting us to think. All right, so that's basically what that looks like. What are our numbers? Here we go. This is this semester snapshot as of this week, okay? Student learning in terms of career readiness, everything that's not information literacy. I chose 11 students who are either brand new to the library or for some reason were gone for at least a year and are coming back. The bottom lines, pre-assessments. The top lines, the sort of baby blue there's post-assessment. This graph alone demonstrates significant amounts of student learning. They are learning things that they had no idea when it came to customer service, professional ethics codes. What is FERPA? What is their rights under FERPA? And therefore, how do they protect those rights of patrons when they come in? These are all things that they are learning now. And what's interesting about this, though, is the career readiness in terms of like the service and all of that. These average numbers are actually higher than I would have expected. I mean, that's like 75. That's a good C right there. So that tells us that probably a lot of these students have customer service experience or, in the past coming in. Maybe they worked in high school. That alone will allow us to tweak the program in the future to maybe tone those down a little bit because they don't need to learn as much of those, right? And then we can focus on other things as well. So overall, if you want to see growth of learning, pre-assessment, roughly 74%, jumping up to 97% in the post-test. That is a 31% increase in student learning. And 30% was my goal for myself, and that is where we are. 30 to 40% is considered pretty good in K through 12, so I thought I would adopt that. So let's look at Info Lit. Information literacy, as I would have expected, I think, right? The pre-tests are a little bit lower, right? I mean, we get into extremely advanced stuff with information literacy. Some of the questions, like I'm asking them about Dunning-Kruger, right? Like, and how does that impact how we evaluate expertise, right? Like we are really getting into the stuff that they can use in their other classes. We are still seeing significant student learning happening. The scores are still a little lower, right, than that other one, but we're still seeing significant learning happen so that overall, we're actually having a 32% increase with a 96% post-test rate. And of course, we're down to a 72% pre-test rate. We have maybe 2 students who are skewing the data just a little bit. One is a grad student, so already has quite a bit of research experience under that. But this number, I mean, professors would kill to have this level of student learning, these 31 percentage point increase in student learning in their classroom. I also teach library history at IUND. I would love for this amount of student learning to be captured so easily in that moment. So these are all the things that you can do by integrating a mapped assessment plan within program learning goals, student learning outcomes, and within student learning outcomes, making sure those are tied to some sort of like institutional learning outcomes from there. So, oh, I'm actually 4 minutes ahead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop for a second. Questions about what you've seen so far before we get into Canvas and we show you what this looks like. Yes?
So I was a work study student for 4 years in 2 different academic libraries. And during my senior year, a program similar to this was implemented in my library using Canvas as well, which was our normal learning management software. And the overall reaction from my peers, especially those who were not planning to be library students, was I don't want to do this because this is extra work. So obviously, I think from my perspective, and then also someone who audited this program later as some other work I did, do you think there was a necessary kind of attitude change towards the work that students were doing in the library in order for them to buy in to this?
Great question. So first of all, I will say we have not had any negative pushback except for one brand new student who used to work for us a while ago, and so is not used to the new module, but it's also some other things that I think is the issue. We have students coming to us and being like, this is great. Like, I'm in my research methods class and this is what we're doing, right? Or I couldn't believe that all this goes into the library, because we still live in that world where people think if you just work in a library, you're a librarian, you don't have to have a master's and all of that. It's opening up these levels of conversations that are also tailored to each individual student. When we do the micro intervention, we're looking at their majors, we're talking about their majors, we're talking about issues that are important. How does that impact information literacy, right? Like we are talking about it in those terms. Early on in the modules, we give them, it's spelled out. What are the benefits of working here? This is what you're going to have to do, and here's how it's going to affect you. I did a research study from 2015 to 2021 looking at past work study students in our library. And we are graduating students, if you work for it, 79%. That is well past the national average of about 35%, right? So there is correlation, causation, I know. But I mean, there is some sort of correlation there that is interesting. I think also they are getting more, because they're getting more one-on-one with faculty librarians, depending on the type of module, they're getting one-on-one with access services staff members. And we are really developing those relationships that we also know something seems off at work. How are you doing in your classes? What resources can we may not be able to provide, but we know who can, right? How can we do that? And so right now, I'm not gonna say this is gonna stay. I will say they're thriving at this moment. And we have not really had the pushback. We thought there was gonna be, yeah, but we have not actually. Yes, in the back.
I'm going to assume all of your work study students kind of do a blanket level and public services or all jobs instead of being in one specific area?
Yes. Yeah. So when we broke down that old, reference desk over there, we don't call it reference, and they could just sit at the circ desk and answer phones. We now have a single service desk model, and so they do all circulation activities that one would expect. They have to be greeters, all of that, and then we have empowered them now as peer research assistants to try to break down library anxiety, which the literature is full of, right? Especially first year, first semesters. And we see this sitting at the desk. Well, not you still look like a student, but like if I'm sitting at the desk and a student is sitting at the desk, they go straight to the student. Interestingly enough, if I'm sitting at the desk and one of my employees who's much, much older than I am, they go to me, right? So they're going to who they see as a peer. And so because of that, we are training them to answer entry level research questions. And then the maiden skill is knowing where their expertise lies and how to triage, and then when to send to a librarian, when to send to an access services staff member at that moment. So they are empowered up to a certain point. They can go past that point as long as they're feeling empowered, and we're assessing that they're doing well with it. I think he was first, then I'll come to you.
So it's a mechanical question. When are they doing this learning, these learning activities? Is this, during their shifts,
Yes.
in between helping patrons?
Yes. So we have a rule policy in place. They cannot be at the desk by themselves without a full-time person or a senior work studies student until they've completed so many modules, until we're also happy with the hands-on activities. So this is major staff and faculty buy-in. Okay, that does require that. But for each cohort, when those senior students come back, they're now getting supervisory experience and training experience by doing that. That's the goal of this. And then also in the past model, we had students who would come in, sit down, and be like, okay, 7 modules, and they would just plow through them, and they don't retain anything. And that's when we came out to the assessment data. So now we monitor. Their first day, they can do 3 modules or 2 hours, whichever comes first, and they have to stop, and they have to shadow at the desk. Pretty much putting on the hands-on features of what they're learning. So they're getting the theory and everything behind, then they put it into practice in some way in that way. Once we get to the info lit modules, it drastically changes. You're allowed to do 1 module, period. You can take notes. You can study those notes however you want in your classes, but they're not allowed to do these outside of the work environment. Yes.
So at my university, all of our faculty librarians, they have liaison duties, regardless of what their title is,
Yeah.
whether they
We do
resource
too.
librarian.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And our front desk students are information commons students, and in the past, they've actually gone into the classroom with these faculty librarians for teaching. I think it's for our first year seminar.
Yeah.
Are your students also in the classroom?
So that's very interesting. We just started this year. We started testing it with 2 students who are transfer students and therefore don't get the first year experience in that interaction with the librarian in the classroom. They have sat in with librarians to learn. We ask them to hold because they're going in with a little bit more advanced knowledge already, hold their question, but we continue to wrap up with them in that way. Now, I will say one of the things that we're doing in the next phase, once students reach peer mentor, the highest, they can do all of this stuff. Each of the librarians, because we focus, we're generalists, but we focus on specific areas. So outreach and marketing and social media, they have interest in that. If we have students from the School of Education who want to be teachers, if we have students who want to go into archives, whatever, then what we are doing is going to be creating a whole new set of modules tailored to that specific librarian, and we will pair that student up with that librarian so that maybe they can co-teach a class, because they're going to be co-teaching in K-12 anyway, or they can work in the archives a little bit. And one of the things that I will say before I turn it over to Alex, talking about one of the things that you said, because we don't have an LIS program, students were not coming to us because they were interested in libraries or to work in libraries. They came to us for the same 3 rules that people tend to go to grad school. They like books, whatever. In this case, what they're doing now is I've maybe had 1 student every couple of semesters be like, oh, this is kind of interesting. I might want to go into library science. 5, After this, we have 5 now saying, I need to know more about grad school for library science. And they're like freshmen, right? So we're not trying to brainwash them. It's just sort of happening when they learn that information literacy and the information life cycle, they learn about Robert Darnton. They learn about this stuff and they're finding it surprisingly interesting. So they're looking to go in that way. I just had an hour-long conversation with a student yesterday who wants to become an academic librarian focusing in literature because she didn't know that was a thing until now. All right, so now I'm gonna turn it over to Alex to show you Canvas, its structure. I may jump in every now and again.
All right, so just like this presentation is split into the theory versus practical application, so are most of our modules, and you'll be able to see that. Before I actually go to the modules, I'll show you just briefly this overview screen. They have to read this before they're allowed to even start the modules. Gives them a breakdown of why they're important to the library. Also, very importantly, specifies they're not able to work on the modules outside of their scheduled shifts because we want them to get paid for this. So we also have definitions about learning outcomes, program level goals, because we want full transparency within this, and we want them to understand what it is we want them to learn and how we are assessing them on that. So,
Will that make that bigger? Control shift plus. Not making it bigger. Okay, never mind.
okay, Christopher, anything to add before I jump to the modules?
No, we want our employees to get paid.
Yeah.
That's for, yeah.
So going to the modules, I won't read off every single one that we have, but like Christopher had mentioned, we have over 20. They are split relatively evenly between patron service and information literacy. So in the first 3 modules, we usually have them do the first 3 modules on their first day of employment or up to 2 hours. And that's true all the way up until they get to information literacy, 2 hours per shift. We break down what they're doing in the library and why they are important to the library more in depth than just the overview. So I'll show you. You can see at the top, we have that pre-assessment that Christopher mentioned. And then I'll go into this page momentarily, but we have some theoretical breakdown of the concept that's covered in the module, then some practical application. In this first module, we have the first of 2 essays that Christopher has assigned them, in which they have to think about how the library is going to relate in the terms of the NACE competencies, which are laid out, and I'll show you how that will relate to their future career, and then they will build on that in the later essay. Then they have their first post-assessment, and after that post-assessment is a break and debrief. And that break and debrief is where they get that micro intervention from either access services supervisor or a librarian, depending on if it is patron services related or information literacy related. And then once again, if they don't get 100 on that first post-assessment, then we, after the micro intervention, assign this second attempt. But they will wait at least a shift before they complete that second attempt so we can make sure that they're retaining it. So I will jump in really quickly to this first module so that I can show you before we even have them begin any of the rest of the modules, we actually discuss the NACE competencies so that they can see what they are. Again, we want them to know what they're learning and how they can define those and what information they are based on. So we have laid out the NACE competencies and the program learning goals that were created for the course and their definitions, so they can see each of those. And then for each of the modules that follow, we only include the ones that are covered by that module. So jump back here.
In terms of the essays, one of the reasons why that's really important. How many academic librarians do I have in here? Yeah. So HLC, one of the things they're going to be focusing on more and more is can a philosophy major tie what they're learning in the classroom to a future career? That is becoming more and more of just the topic in higher ed. So there are campuses who are struggling to start implementing this now, right? Our campus hasn't figured out this yet in the classroom, but we're working on it. And so this is one of the ways that the libraries can be leaders on their campuses.
So I'm gonna go ahead and jump down to our information or our interlibrary loan module. So you can see how we have set that up to ensconce it within our assessment plan here. So again, we start off with a pre-assessment with questions based on both the theory of interlibrary loan and then what they're actually learning within the pages of the module. And then every module has an overview. So in this particular one, you can see those program learning goals that are covered by this module. So we have ones that, obviously make sense, critical thinking. They have to be able to know how to go about researching or finding resources so that they can provide. And sometimes that can be tricky. You can search within our OneSearch EBSCO database and not be able to find something. So they have to be able to problem solve their way out of that to see if we have the article and we can access it in a different way, for example. But also teamwork is, like Christopher pointed out, a program learning goal that we hadn't covered as much in the other modules, but that we will be applying to interlibrary loan. For example, they're going to be working with me directly, both of course in training, but also when they cannot fill a request, they're not allowed to say, no, we can't fill this request. They have to mark it as considering. And at that point, I will discuss with them, or one of the other Access Services members will discuss with them the processes that they follow to try to find that resource. And I will either duplicate those processes and see if we still can't find it, or at that point, provide other options that they could use, or just confirm that, yeah, we just don't have access to it. So in that way, they're going to be working with me. They're also going to be working with their co-workers, their fellow peer research assistants, and trying to find those resources and communicating the steps that they took. So after that, we have sort of the theoretical breakdown of what interlibrary loan is and why is it important. Earlier in the modules, we discussed the ALA Code of Ethics and the ALA Code of Ethics. And so I address it in terms of this triadic model of information literacy that Christopher created. That is at the beginning of their information literacy modules. So it is building upon that, but specifically the component of information access. So we're trying to tie everything together as we go through this module to the rest of what they have learned.
So they have seen that now at this point, like 3, 4 other times. And this is the model that I use when I teach information literacy. So their goal is to every semester to unpack another one of these more and more and more. And this is one of those areas for access.
But yeah, we also, just want to get them thinking more deeply about these topics by tying them all together. I think, you talked about buy-in from the students. I think the benefit to these modules is, one, they're all kind of set up in the same structure, which is kind of different compared to the previous set of modules that we had. And they're kind of bite-sized, sort of, in that they have this theoretical concept and then the practical application. So they're a little bit easier to consume, if you will.
Yeah. Well, this year when I was reviewing the old modules, which I wrote, by the way, I'm reading them and I'm like, who wrote this? This is like, it's like, oh, asking on about this concept. They don't need to know that. They don't care, right? How can I translate it into this? This is also a good use of AI. Simplify this paragraph that I wrote, simplify this paragraph so that somebody, say, in 12th grade can answer or read it, understand it. Great use for AI.
You can't see them here, but the next page I have then the practical application. So an overview of WorldShare. And because WorldShare and interlibrary loan processes are a little bit easier to explain over video, I do have a video here, but it's blocking it because it's embedded through Kaltura. So unfortunately, we can't see the little screenshot of it. Some breakdown of interlibrary loan terms that they might see on WorldShare, and then how they even process interlibrary loan requests, which hopefully by this point in the modules they would know, but a refresher is always helpful. The next page is a breakdown of some information tools that they can use, which is expanding on a concept that they learned in a previous information literacy module. So specifically talking about WorldCat and then some internal resources that we have, searching through our journals.
And those spaces are all videos, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
they are. And the same with blending. So I cover different types of requests that we get. They're primarily going to be focused on copy requests for lending, and how to build those various requests. Again, these are just videos that they'll be able to watch. And then at the end of each video, I encourage them to write down questions that they have so we can discuss them. Of course, we're going to be training them on this and working together with them for the first several, however many that they do before they feel comfortable. And then this is the part where, again, we've told them, mark something as considering if you don't feel comfortable, you can't find the resource, and that provides an opportunity for us to see what procedures they're following and how we can either improve them or just validate them. And then finally, there's a page on the ethical and legal considerations, again, tying it back into the triadic model, relating especially to information, sort of somewhat access, but information use as well. And so I discussed somewhat the Copyright Act and fair use doctrines, and then the Constitute guidelines, not just what they do, but how are they relevant to the library, especially as guidelines. And I encourage them to think through if they are relevant and how they will be relevant in the future. We're not trying to force opinions upon them. We're trying to encourage them to build those critical thinking skills that we lay out in the NAEPS competencies, so that they're thinking about these topics more in depth, whether or not they're going into libraries in the future or they're just going to consume resources themselves, or if they're sharing them as teachers or whatever profession that they're going into in the future. And then that is the last page, and then it jumps to the post assessment.
Even last night as I was leaving the library too, the workspace students stopped me and they were like, "We don't think piracy is unethical." I was like, "Let's have a conversation." Right? And we sat down and we were able to do that.
We have time for questions. I just want, because it's my favorite picture in the whole world. Not what I meant to do. I did break it. No, collapse solve. That's what I was trying to do. Information types appropriate. No, I'm looking for Prince William. Yeah, right there. Like, that's one of my favorite pictures that we discuss in depth. But anyway, so we have time. This is only semester 1. After this, semester 2 and beyond, they have to take not really a pre or post assessment. They have to take an assessment to see when they come back in the fall, have they retained things? If not, we direct them to one of the first semester modules. Again, they have to review it. They don't have to do a post assessment at this point. We'll see about that in the future. But then also, we will have, it's being built, an entire series. We're a LinkedIn campus. So they, throughout the course of this semester, the first semester alone, they can earn up to like 5 certificates from LinkedIn that they can add to their resumes and CVs. This generation is super into micro-credentialing. So them having something is another thing that I think has helped. They even get a shelving certificate based on it, but we've defined it in a certain way. The others are LinkedIn. They have to, and it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's communication skills. They're earning these certificates. Starting semester 2, they have to continue earning a minimum of 2 certificates every semester. It's less module based at that point and more LinkedIn, and they can choose the areas that they are interested in.
Just a quick question. How do your students move from, peer research assistants to associates?
Yeah. In the past, it's been informal evaluation by primarily us and Access Services. I may consult some of the other librarians depending on it. We used to have checklists, a training checklist of certain basic things that they should know how to do. And then they could not go to associate until that point. They do also, I will say, they don't necessarily get a title bump, but they get a pay bump if they learn how to shelve. Shelving is not mandatory anymore, but they do get 2 pay bumps if they shelve different parts of the collections. Starting now, one of the things, what's being developed now, because I'm going on sabbatical in the spring, so we need something a little bit more systematic in place,
One of the things that they're going to be doing is we are going to have 3 different sheets of hands-on activities. Can you do the thing without help? They need to be able to do the things. Secondly, the pre and post test that they take coming